Let's do that. Right, good morning. Morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. With the current pandemic we are facing, we're all experiencing, one key question on everyone's mind is, are we agile and resilient enough to survive the disruption? Questions about the speed which organizations can adapt or how quickly they can adopt and plug in new technologies, or how responsive we are to sudden shifts in consumer demands, are top of mind and remaining relevant today. The good news is that integrating agility and resilience into the organization is never too late, and innovative technology platforms are available to give you the speed to do so. I am Scott Beattie, and thank you for joining us this morning. With me is Daniel Chilcott from our trusted partner Flowgear. But before I hand over to Daniel, let me take a couple of minutes to tell you about who we are. So First Digital, we are part of the First Technology Group. We build software solutions using code and platforms, and on-premises and in the cloud. We're about 140 plus developers and consultants spread across South Africa in 3 main locations. What's important about that is we don't develop in isolation. We develop as an integrated delivery unit for our customers. And we dedicated specifically to Microsoft, but more importantly to best of breed technologies that are available in the marketplace today. If we talk about our specific competencies, I'll just take you through those. So with regards to our specific competencies, application modernization and development is a key focus for us. And essentially that's where we really started from. That's our fabric of our organization. Business process management and RPA, absolutely critical today in terms of being able to automate processes and making sure that companies can remain resilient in today's market and challenges that we face. Mobile application development is a key focus for us as well in helping organizations turn on mobile platforms for their organizations. Modern workplace and productivity is an absolute key area for us, especially with regards to Microsoft's Office 365 platform and the ability to leverage some key technologies and applications within that platform today. In addition to these competencies, if we go over to the last slide, application lifecycle management is a core fabric in terms of how we deliver for organizations and for our customers, especially with regards to DevOps, and specifically with regards to Microsoft leveraging the Microsoft DevOps platform. It's a key focus for us to ensuring that we deliver for our customers. BI and analytics is a core area for us as well. So it's all about being able to leverage the data that's in place inside your organization. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to leverage the data sitting within your core systems and leverage the tools that allow you to pull that data out into some key analytics dashboards and reports inside your organization. Moving over to the last competency area, which is key to today's talk and webinar, database integration and RPA, but specifically more to integration. When we talk about integration, all of our engagements inevitably result in some sort of integration need within our engagements and within our projects that we deliver. The ability to light up your applications you're using by tapping into relevant data and processes is more important than ever. To do this effectively, a good integration platform is needed. Flowgear is that platform that we're talking about today. And to take you through it, please welcome Daniel, who will take you through Flowgear and its capabilities. Daniel, morning.
Morning, Scott. Thanks very much. Appreciate the time today, and folks, thanks for joining us. Obviously we spent a bit of time going through this deck, but I didn't actually look at that cartoon on the right-hand side, and it's hilarious. We should just talk about BI and analytics, moving on from that cartoon. But yeah, so let me give you a bit of an introduction into Flowgear, just give you a bit of context as to where we come from. I think the first thing to understand is that the integration problem is far more profound than what we've ever experienced before. If you think back to the 90s and even the early 2000s, most businesses actually were still relying on these monoliths. So we had these monolithic ERPs that kind of did everything that we needed, and if we needed more functionality, we'd bolt that on. And what's happened now in the era of cloud is as organizations, we're losing control of the systems that we're dependent on. And that's happening for a couple of reasons, but one of them certainly is because of the adoption of cloud. So as soon as we move from on-premise to cloud, we no longer have the ability to forklift data in and out as we did before, and we must rely on APIs instead. And as we've moved away from monolithic ERPs with more of an emphasis on individual kind of highly tailored line of business systems, we're using more systems than ever. So we've gone from a very small number of software systems to a very large number of diversified products. Many of them are very specialized to the specific industries that we operate in. And so those things compounded together have exacerbated the integration problem. And what Flowgear allows you to do is integrate all of the internal systems that you're using together so that data can move easily between them internally, and then also gives you a platform that allows you to interact meaningfully with third parties like your upstream vendors or your customers or your partners. And this is an important point as well. So Flowgear can be extended to do kind of like B2B style integrations without just a kind of single portal where you can manage orders. It can go way beyond that. So any kind of integration that you need with third parties, it can go beyond order flow to any other types of integration scenarios that need to be integrated as well. Now, fundamentally, the reason our customers invest in our platform is actually about reducing cost. And that is realized in a number of different ways. Normally, what's happening in a business if they don't have an integration platform is that there are a whole bunch of manual processes that are being performed by their staff. That's using time for those folks, and they could be doing something that's more productive or offers more value to the business. So if you can automate those processes, you're freeing them up to move on to higher level processes, effectively boosting their productivity. What you're also able to do is move away from the data silos so that you have multiple systems that can talk to each other. So if you have common data across multiple systems, you're able to give every department in your organization a 360-degree view of the organization. So you have maybe customer account data that's sitting in the finance system inside the ERP. Well, Flowgear would give you a way to integrate part of that data through into the CRM system as well. And then finally, because you can augment integrations with third parties like your customers and suppliers, you can achieve an operational efficiency that perhaps your competitors aren't able to achieve. I'm getting some feedback that some folks can't hear me. Can we just get confirmation there, Scott? Maybe from the audience. Is there anyone else having problems hearing me?
Yeah, let me just ask quickly.
I'm assuming as a participant, my audio should be going through there.
I'm not getting any response back from everybody. I'm assuming everybody can hear Daniel. If you can please let me know if you are having challenges on your side.
Yeah, just send us a chat. Someone just said that they weren't able to hear. Just want to be sure it's only affecting one person and it's not something that I have configured incorrectly. So let me move on from there. So one of the challenges that we have with our platform actually is because it's middleware, it's very difficult for people who aren't in technical roles to understand what we do. And so we try and highlight the types of use cases that the platform gets applied to. The reality is just about every business at kind of SMB or larger actually has an integration requirement. There are processes that they're running manually that if they could automate, they'd get a lot of operational efficiency out of it, but they're just not aware of it. So here's just kind of a smattering of some of the use cases that the platform is typically applied to. We do have some clients who onboard with just wanting like one point-to-point integration, like an e-commerce platform needing to be integrated into the accounting system. But normally it's a bit more of a strategic investment where you're looking at connecting 4, 5, 6 different systems together. So for example, we have customers who have built a self-service app. The app developers didn't have to build any backend. Flowgear becomes the backend for interacting with the internal systems, and they can use that to drive self-service functionality to their customers. And that would be in a B2C or a B2B role. We have other customers who have multiple branches in disparate locations, and they need to be able to roll up financial data from each of those geographically disparate regions and disparate accounting systems into head office. So Flowgear can kind of augment pulling all of that data together and collating it so that it can be reported on. And then we have others who are using it from a tracking perspective, and this kind of relates to that e-commerce example that I showed you or mentioned. So orders integrate from the e-commerce platform into the fulfillment system, maybe that's the ERP or the accounting system, and then as those orders are getting processed, tracking information is getting sent out to those customers as well. So one of the common things that we come up against is customers, as I mentioned, if they haven't used a platform, then what they're probably going to be doing is having hand-coded existing integration. So when is the point in time that a hand code stops working and you should look at a platform? So I think, to be fair, hand code solutions definitely work in kind of niche cases where there's a very small number of integrations. So if you've just got 1 or 2 or maybe 3 integrations that you need, hand-coded might just work for you. But as you scale, that starts to become very inefficient for these reasons. First of all, unless you're a technology company, a hand-coded integration is going to be prone to quite a lot of brittleness, and that could be very difficult to maintain over time. Because every time a vendor updates their accounting product or their CRM or whatever it is that you're integrating, that integration itself is going to need a revision. If that's done at source code, it's maybe a developer outsourced. You need to get in touch with them. You need to pay to get the thing upgraded. They got to deploy it back into your environment. So there tends to be a high cost of ownership with those solutions as well. And the problem is that you, as a customer, you may not always be cognizant of when an integration is going to break. So from your perspective, you're just applying a small update to your accounting product, but now suddenly it broke an integration that you depend on in real time. So that has a real cost to being able to do business. What we do in our platform is give you connectors that are going to be kept up to date all the time. So if you're using a Sage product and you have a new version of that, you put an upgrade in, well, our connectors are going to be published to that latest version. So there's no downtime, there's no change over, there's no sort of manual process required to be able to support that latest version, and certainly no coding required. What we also do is give you a platform that allows you to design those integrations visually, so that instead of having kind of this black box that was compiled source code delivered to you, you can actually see the structure of those integrations. And if you certainly, you might not be comfortable making changes to them, but you can certainly go into the console and have a look at what they're doing. You can review the logs of what happened, and you can view visually how that data is mapped and how it's being shaped as it moves across different systems. And all of these kind of things combined with the fact that we've got a suite of connectors that are available out the box mean that you can get stuff done much more quickly. And that lets you be much more kind of exploratory in the use cases that you want to apply the integration to. So let's say you've just adopted a new CRM, let's say it's Dynamics 365. Well, we got the connector for that. So to be able to just stand up a test connection and run some test integrations in it is something that you could do within minutes, rather than an outsource to a software house where it's kind of a few weeks turnaround after you've approved their proposal. Now, practically, the category that we fit into is known as iPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service. And that is a category of platform that allows you to engage with structured data sources in a way that's very efficient. And by structured, I mean things like databases and files, and certainly APIs would be probably the most preferable there. And what it will also allow you to do, as I've mentioned, is design these integrations visually. But more recently, there have been some new vendors emerge. Scott actually alluded to this earlier, RPA capabilities, which of course stands for robotic process automation. And what these tool sets seek to do is engage with the front end of applications. And that's really empowering, because an end user may not understand how to connect to a database or an API, but they do know how to use the front end of their product. So if someone, for example, is tasked with customer onboarding, and every month they're signing into SAP, and they run through this kind of multi-step process to onboard customers. Well, using an RPA tool, they can kind of hit a record button, a little bit like an Excel macro, but it's kind of recording your actions on the screen, and then allowing them to be replayed. So when you have future customers to onboard, you could just say, run this bot using this set of data, and the job just gets done. So very empowering for end users. One of the downsides is that the front ends tend to be brittle. If an update to the platform gets shipped, it's quite likely that there will be breaking changes to the front end that bot is no longer able to work. So what we think is that the best is actually the best of both worlds. And so what we're building in Flowgear is RPA capabilities that you can use where you don't have the option of an API, or you just want to do some kind of lightweight exploratory work, but then you can blend that with the core iPaaS capability. And the RPA specifically is a feature set that we're going to get shipped out toward the tail end of this year, about Q4 this year. And that allows you to hand off seamlessly across these two worlds. Now, our platform is certainly not for everyone, so let me just explain where we fit into what we call the continuum. On the far left, we have what we call the citizen integrated platforms. That's a Gartner term, and that would include platforms like Zapier and IFT. And if those meet your requirements, then that's fantastic. They're very low cost. They're usually not particularly configurable. The data mappings aren't that deep and complex, but for many use cases, that's just fine. And on the far other end of the spectrum, you've got the ESB tool sets. Many of these are going to be on-premise tools. Often on-premise means a license that is unaffordable unless there's a very extensive use of the capability, plus the fact that you need to provision infrastructure like servers and so on, and then be responsible for managing uptime. And then also in that kind of enterprise space are many other iPaaS platforms, but most of them have a price tag that is far more suited to enterprise use, and that's because they're really geared for extremely high throughputs. So some of these models center around licensing a number of CPU cores. Well, you can get a lot of integration done on even just 2 CPU cores. So a lot of those are out of band for what we call the SMB to enterprise space, and that's where Flowgear fits in quite snugly. And there aren't a lot of offerings in this space, so we found that this differentiates well. Now, the target market that we talk about is typically a 50 to 1,000 person business. We have outliers on either side of that, but generally speaking, that's where most of our customers sit. And what we found is that the number of people in the business usually has some kind of correlation with the number and the complexity of systems. So that's just kind of a ballpark about where we would fit in. There's really 3 advantages or 3 kind of key pillars to a platform. The first, as I've mentioned, is the kind of ease of use aspect. Because you can build things visually, you can rapidly prototype and then iterate on those designs. So it doesn't have to be this really formal process before you're able to get anything up and running. You can see the results very quickly, and we believe quite strongly that you should have the option, at least, to be able to iterate and achieve a number of iterations over a short space of time, because often you'll get a better outcome than if you try to kind of foresee everything up front and then launched a project cascade style. Now, you absolutely can do waterfall style projects, but Flowgear gives you that flexibility to use that more kind of agile approach to the design. And those 2 things combined means that as a prospective customer, you'll gain an agency and like an autonomy over the integration, because it's not this black box that you don't have any visibility into. You can see what's happening, you can make changes, and you can engage very effectively. Even if you have an outsourced partner who's delivering this for you, you're talking about the same thing. You'll say to them, I need this change in this workflow. You've seen the workflow, you've seen how the data mappings work. So your ability to communicate across those 2 worlds is significantly enhanced. At the same time, we support pretty sophisticated use cases that kind of breaks down in at least 3 ways. First is that you might have multiple systems to target. So it's not just, pull from A, integrate into B. There might be multiple other systems that you need to talk to along the way. You can support those kind of multi-endpoint integrations in Flowgear. We also support very complex data mappings, but visually, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a flavor of that in the demo that we get into. And then finally, I mentioned that cloud obviously its adoption has been prolific, but we're still often depending on some key internal on-premise systems. So Flowgear does give you the ability to map into on-premise systems seamlessly as well. Now, from a commercial perspective, the model that we have is very different to pretty much any other that we're aware of, actually. So many other vendors are going to look at a model that licenses you on CPU cores, or they have a base license and then you pay for additional connectors that you want, or they charge you for the number of transactions. So you pay per 1,000 invoices that you want to sync or something like that. What we do instead is we talk about active workflows. And a workflow is an integration that connects at least sort of 2 systems together. So pull from A, integrate into B, potentially into others as well. That's a workflow. But you can control exactly when that workflow is running. Some of them only need to run once a month. It's kind of a batch process. Some of them need to run continuously. Some of them need to be invoked via an API. I'll show you that in a demo as well. But they all have, the point is they all have these different models, and not all of them need to run at the same time. So you can control which subset of your workflows are active at a point in time. You might have 100 built, but only 10 need to be active. And so those active ones are going to enable you to select which plan to move on to. What that allows you to do is, because we make all of the connectors available, and you can design as many workflows as you want, you can explore a lot of different use cases, but not have to commit commercially until you know that you're getting value from those use cases. And that allows you to just naturally pack on more integrations over time and get more efficiency out of all of that without having to have made a significant upfront commitment around it. So this is how this breaks down. All of this pricing is public. I think if you're in South Africa, you'll see RAND pricing. Maybe taking a little bit of a risk here, but our RAND pricing is actually discounted. So we have the best pricing in the world. But you can see here the highlighted item is the active workflows. So even on our base plan, you get 10 active workflows. And again, that could mean that you have 100 that you've designed, but you can control which of those 100 are active at a point in time and be able to move on to the plan that's most effective for you. Now, part of the value of our platform, of course, is the breadth of connectors that we have. We have roughly 200 today. About half of those are what we refer to as product connectors, and you can see a sampling of them on screen over here. Those are going to be things like your ERP, your CRMs, HR, e-commerce platforms, and so on. So some of the products that you would recognize here. And then the other half, the other 100, are what we call technology connectors, and those allow you to engage with systems based on open standards. For example, any type of SQL database, different types of file systems, different flavors of FTP, and importantly, different types of APIs, be that SOAP or REST. So those are going to be supported generically. So even if we don't have a product connector, the technology connector will allow you to engage with that product. And if you want to, you can build your own connectors as well. I know, First Tech, obviously being a Microsoft shop, be interested in this, but you can build your own connectors using the .NET platform. Obviously built in Visual Studio as C# classes. So if you are in a tech business, you have developers on staff, they can actually do that. And the SDK that we give you to do that is the identical one that our team uses. So we dog food that for ourselves. You can self-build and publish those connectors and then make them available for your own internal use, or you can share them across the full Flowgear platform as well. So just before we get into the demo now, in terms of the delivery model, we run on top of Microsoft Azure, so we're the only vendor in South Africa to give you in-country hosting on an iPaaS platform. We've been running on the South African North environment as our primary since about May last year, a couple of months after Azure SA went live. We have 3 regions around the world, so if you are multinational or you're perhaps interested for your customers, then we can locate you in the region that's most appropriate for you. And then important to know on this as well that we have a couple of different delivery models. You can take public cloud, so the highlighted regions are a public cloud, but you can also take private cloud in almost any region of your choosing, so anywhere where there's an Azure data center. And under that model, we have 2 variants on that as well. If you have an EA with Microsoft and you have your own Azure tenant ID, we can actually deploy the platform instance under your tenant ID so that you can decide how you want to manage the infrastructure. Maybe you want to be able to allocate spend against the budget that you've already predetermined on that EA and so on. You could certainly use that option, or the default mode would be that we run that infrastructure for you. Even under the private cloud model, we run the same SLA-backed hot DR. So we run a disaster recovery in a secondary data center within the same region, and there's a sort of a less than a 5-minute window to do a complete and an automated failover if there was an issue at a kind of a data center level. So with that, let me go into the demo. I'll just give you a quick overview of what we're going to look at today. So we're going to start with a quick example in Dynamics 365. Let's say that we've received some orders. Maybe those orders have reached a certain state where they now need to be processed. We're going to pull those out of Dynamics 365 and then integrate them into Sage 200. We'll generate invoices in Sage. And then on the back of that, we want to let the organization know that those orders have been processed. So just as a demo of that, we're going to push some messages through to Microsoft Teams. So you can see how that would surface. And I'll elaborate on some of the options available to that as well. And then as kind of a bit of a separate demo, I want to give you a bit of a flavor of how you can use Flowgear as an API backend. So if you have a mobile app one of the challenges for mobile app developers is they're usually really good at designing a front end and kind of a user experience, but they very seldom have expertise around the back-end system. So they'll know how to build an iOS or an Android app, but they're not necessarily going to be particularly skilled up on Microsoft Stack products or different ERPs or e-commerce platforms that you need to connect into. So part of the value here is that you can have the app developers focus on what they're good at, namely the mobile user experience. But then when they need to perform some action, like maybe generate a ticket from the app or query order status or place an order, they can just kind of throw that data at Flowgear. And in Flowgear, that you can use the workflow designer to actually be able to integrate into those internal endpoints. So you're offloading all of that business logic and the decisions around how that data is going to be acquired into Flowgear, no coding, and then also decoupling that from the mobile app development responsibility. So with that, let me pull up a couple of things over here. So first of all, this is my Dynamics 365, and I'm looking at the orders tab right now, and you can see that I've got 2 orders that are pending for processing in there. So those are the orders that we're going to build a workflow to be able to read. And if I have a look at Flowgear, here's my Flowgear account. I'm going to go into a couple of different workflows. This is the workflow design area that we're looking at. And this is where an implementation partner or a developer that you maybe have on staff would be engaging with the product. And the first 2 steps here are pretty self-explanatory. We're calling Dynamics 365 to request the order header information, and then we're getting the detail lines associated with that. Over here, this prepare stage, I'll show you just now, but this is doing kind of the field mappings to prepare that data, because of course 365 is going to present an order using different fields and nomenclature to what Sage expects. And then over on the right-hand side is the Sage integration. But what I want to show you here is how it feels to use these connectors. So I'll just add a new one. I've got a connection that I've pre-configured, and then you'll notice that there's a request and a response, and those are empty at the moment. So what we do in Flowgear is make these different samples available where you can choose from a list of actions that are supported in 365. And what this is doing now is querying my trial or my Sandbox 365 account and getting a list of all of the actions that are available. It should come back to me with that list of actions in a sec. You can see there's about 1,600 samples. So these are all of the different interactions that API supports. And I can just filter for one of them. I'm going to use the create account example. And what that's doing now, again, is querying my company account and getting a list of all of the fields defined in accounts for my specific company. And it's now generated these specimen payloads for me. So over on the right-hand side is a listing of all of those fields. If this was a hierarchical data structure, it would be able to show me that as well. But now I've understood what the schema for this looks like, and that is the basis that I'll use in Flowgear. So I'll load up the source sample, I'll map the data visually, and then I'll load up the target sample. And on the topic of mapping, if we have a look at that visual data mapper, I'm just going to drill into that. Over on the left-hand side over here, we're looking at the sales orders. I showed you that now in Dynamics 365. So those are the sales orders. And then over on the right-hand side are sales orders in Sage Evolution. And you can see that we've got these mappings that are connecting these fields across. And I can just kind of add new mappings by dragging and dropping. So that gets me kind of field and container level mappings. As I do that, it's giving me a real-time preview of that document over on the right-hand side. So this is that same data, but it's been restructured to be appropriate for Sage 200. And of course, a lot of the time, just taking the fields across as is not really good enough. So what we've got here as well is the ability to manipulate that data using functions. And the key thing to understand here is that these functions are very similar to what you'd have in Microsoft Excel. So for example, if you wanted to uppercase a particular string, there's an upper function, just like you'd find in Microsoft Excel. So I can, just run that upper function. The syntax is the same. You can see it's giving me IntelliSense over there, showing me the different fields and the function names as I started typing that were available. And again, it got me a real-time preview of that. So what that's going to allow you to do is manipulate data in place. Maybe you need to chop a string or a piece of text to a specific length. Maybe you need to split two pieces of text apart. We even support things like VLOOKUPs. So for instance, if you have a stock code in your source system and then it's a different code in the target system and you need to correlate across them, we have a lookup function that behaves very similarly to Microsoft Excel's VLOOKUP. And then you can also filter. So if you want to be able to include or exclude data based on criteria, you can do that. And then finally, you can aggregate. So if you're processing, say, a sales order and you have 3 lines with the same stock code repeated, you might want to collapse those down to a single line in the destination. All of that stuff gets done visually. So this is kind of one place that you can go to be able to manage all of your mappings. So Scott's just asking me to enlarge this a little bit. I'm going to try zoom it in a little bit more. So that's 150%. Hopefully that's a little bit easier to see. So now that I've kind of walked you through the high-level steps, let me just run this workflow so you can see what it looks like. So it's gone and executed these stages now, and what's happened at the bottom of the screen is it's popped out with what we call the activity log, and this is showing all of the stages that just got executed. So it ran get order, and if we go across to the right-hand side, I can have a look at the response XML. And it's showing me a table view of what that order record looked like. It's showing me as a table. If you're interested, what's actually happening under the hood is this is the XML document that came back, but I don't necessarily need to engage with that. So I've got the order header, then we got the order lines on the next step. The third step over here merged the lines into that order header section, and then we ran through that visual data map, and finally we posted that data into Sage Evo as a sales order. And if I look at the response that comes back of that, this is that sales order document. So this gray strip here is the order header section. So I can see the order reference number. I can see the order number there, the dates, and so on. And then over on the right-hand side would be the detail lines that are associated with that specific order. So very kind of simple example. Most integrations are going to be a little bit more involved than that. But fundamentally, you're querying a source, you're reshaping the data, and you're sending it off to its destination. So now that we've looked at that, let me show you something a little bit more involved. This is a bit more of an advanced example. So similar principle, but now what we're doing is we're actually going to get a bunch of orders. So I showed you 2 orders that were waiting for me in my 365 account. So we make a call over here to say, get me the orders. That's going to return the 2 current sales orders. And then we want to iterate through them. So that for each is going to step through order 1 and then order 2. And then for each of those, it's going to obtain the detail lines for the order. And then again, we've got a similar mapping process. This is almost identical to the one that you saw a minute ago. So this is taking that Dynamics 365 sales order with its detail lines and then mapping that out to what's required for Sage 200. And then over on the right-hand side, we're going to, again, ingest that data into Sage 200. So we're going to create that order. But then what we want to do is just confirm that that happened successfully so that we can record that. So over here, this success stage is evaluating whether the document integrated successfully. And the way it's doing that is it's looking at a specific section in the document. So when Sage 200 posts that and we get a response back, it puts this kind of tag in. You can see that success tag over there. And we examine the value on that and say, was that successful? If it was, we record what we call key values, and I'll show you these in a second, but these become the basis of tracking data as it's moving across the system. So the key might be the order number, and the value might be the order in the target system where it just got generated. So they're kind of these correlations. This top one over here is recording a success, as you can see on that status over there, and then the bottom one is recording an error, and that becomes then the basis of the reporting that we want to run. And then finally, we want to send a real-time notification to Teams. So this is a Teams messaging connector. I can put in a title and a subtitle, and then I've got some custom fields that I can plug in. And this is going to show up as a like a message chat card. So let me just get that ready. And then what I'm going to do is run this integration. Hopefully we can keep that going in the background. So you can see in the activity log now, it's busy with the get order stage. So that's querying a list of the orders to be processed. And you can see there that message has pushed through already. So 1034. And these are the custom fields that we put in. So you can kind of parameterize that out as you see fit. You could even customize these cards so that they have hot links. So there could be a button over here. You click that, and it takes you straight into Flowgear to that item so that you can run reporting on it or remediate if there was a failure and so on. And of course, Teams is just one example. That's good for kind of real-time notification, maybe some kind of task flow type management, or if you've got a ticketing system that you want to integrate into, Flowgear could run that for you as well. So you end up generating a ticket for any order that now needs fulfillment, or maybe if the order failed to integrate, that would be a scenario where you want to get a ticket generated so that someone technical could have a look at that for you. So that's a little bit more of a complete example. And then what normally happens is you now want to be able to report on it. So I've got a very simplistic example of how that would look. What we want to do here now is be able to query those key values that I mentioned. If you recall, what those are is a view of the data as it got integrated. So the key is that order number, and the value indicates like a success or a failure. And so if I start by querying all of those key values and we convert that into a spreadsheet, I can get just a simple report back showing me that information. And I've run that workflow. Of course, I'm running it from the design area. An end user isn't going to do that, but just so you can see what the structure actually looks like. And I've now opened up an Excel spreadsheet. And this is going to be just a very basic report showing me everything that's got integrated. So in a production scenario, you're going to have quite a bit more going on in here. You maybe want to show the customer code and the date and maybe the order value and so on. But that is at its simplest, the type of notification that you could send out to someone. You might want to schedule that to run for a specific time of day, or you might want to allow a user to be able to come in and run that report on demand. So let me just spend a moment talking about the different ways that you can automate these workflows. There's actually 3 ways that you can run them. One is, as I mentioned, a user can sign into the console and run the workflow. They don't see the design area, they just hit run and they get some data back. Maybe they get a spreadsheet back like I just showed you. Or you can run them on a trigger. And there are different types of triggers that are available. I'm just going to show you a couple of them over here. So you could wait for data to happen on or arrive on a queue. We support Amazon and Azure for that. Or you could wait for something date and time based. So you could say every day at this time, or every day between these times, or on this day of the month. So we've got a day, a month, and a week scheduler to cover those use cases. Or you could wait for email to arrive at an inbox using this IMAP watcher. So you could receive an email based on its subject, pull out the content of the attachment and parse that. Or you could wait for a change in a database using something like the Microsoft SQL watchers. So those are some of the more common ones. If I take something like the day scheduler, the way that wires in, I'm just going to actually put that right at the beginning of the workflow just so you can see how that would work. Let's say we wanted to run this workflow every day. I could wire that day scheduler into the workflow design just like that. And that would then allow me to run it either on demand. If it was run on demand, it would use this path and go straight to that get order stage. Otherwise, it's going to run in always on mode through the scheduler, kick off at 8 in the morning, and then run that process on an automated basis. So those are 2 modes: run on demand and then run via a trigger, what we call always on. And then the third is that any workflow in Flowgear can be bound to an API as well. So that's the last one that I want to show you. And I mentioned that mobile app just now. So let's say someone's built a mobile app and they want to have the functionality that allows a customer to be able to see their account information. So this is a workflow that allows you to query a database. It's just a Microsoft database, and it's querying actually out of a Sage 200 DB for a specific customer account. We've plugged that customer account in. I've got cust001 is my code. And what that does is it's just going to get me back the details of that one specific customer. I'm going to do a little bit of mapping. Maybe I don't want to return all those details. Maybe I want to rename certain fields. So I'm doing that using Quick Map. But ultimately, that data is going to get returned to the consumer. Then what happens is we can turn this workflow into an API. So over here, where you see demo-domain.flowgear.net, that would be your customer name, your account name, or your company name, .flowgear.net. And you can build out this template. This is a URL template that you can use to invoke this workflow. So once you've done that, you secure that with an API key. You end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So let me just walk you through what's happening. Just see if I can zoom in a touch more there as well. All right, so that's the path that we're doing, and then we're going to query for cust001, and then on the back of that is an authentication key that authorizes you. So a mobile app dev who wants to be able to build an experience where a customer can query their information doesn't have to worry about whether the data is going to come out of a Microsoft product or some other vendor's product or out of a database. They don't have to care about that. All they have to do is call that endpoint, and the data will come back to them in the form that suits them the most. So to demonstrate that, I'm just going to go back to showing my address bar. we could just run it in a browser for purposes of being able to demo this. So that's busy invoking that workflow right now, and you can see it's come back with that document. Currently, it's come back as a JSON document. It could look as an XML or a JSON document, really doesn't matter. But the point is, both the request that we sent, namely for customer 1, and the response that we got back is completely customizable without needing any coding. And so you could use this for third parties as well. I mentioned integration with your suppliers and your customers. Let's say you're in a B2B scenario and you have customers that make bulk purchases from you. You can allow them to transact with you over an API that you build without involving a third-party vendor and without requiring them to get access directly to your ERP. So what you do is you can expose workflows that allow them to kind of just throw an order at you in a form that obviously you've both agreed on. But internally inside the workflow design, you're deciding how you're going to integrate into your internal ERP. Or maybe you need to run a credit check on a new customer. So you could have a workflow that receives that request, it runs a credit check with a third-party vendor, it gets some kind of scoring back. Once that's been approved, it goes and loads the customer account into your ERP. And then maybe as a second step, it also loads a CRM record for that customer. Maybe it loads the default contact and then sets the credit limit there as well. So it's a single endpoint, but it's touching multiple systems, and it can do that, you know, either immediately or over a period of time if there's kind of a workflow process behind it. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of the types of use cases that our platform is typically applied to. Obviously, we'd be happy to elaborate on any of those in more detail. And with that, let me begin closing out by just letting you know that First Digital is a certified channel partner, and what that means is that they've gone through our technical certification course. So this is an intensive multi-day course where their engineers have to be able to complete certain scenarios, so they've been equipped to that level. And I think the first point is really relevant here, because First Tech is a Microsoft-centric vendor. The value that they will give you is the domain expertise around that. And now, of course, as you've seen, we're a Microsoft platform ourselves. We run on .NET, we deliver in Azure, we've got strong support for Microsoft endpoints. But there's nothing quite like having a partner who really understands how to bed those types of systems down, or rather how to provide implementation around those systems. So with that, let me hand back over to Scott.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks very much for the kind words and the support there. So yeah, to end off the webinar, what we're offering is our clients has the opportunity to work with us on a specific use case that you are thinking about or might have at this stage. We'll run a workshop with you. We'll workshop the integration details and the systems that you might want to tap into. We'll build it with you. We'll spend a day with you, invest our time to actually show you how we can do that using Flowgear, and then great. Yeah, I mean, if that's of value to you, please reach out to me directly or via your First Technology account manager, and we'd be happy to jump in and support you in that process. Yeah, and also just to end off by saying thank you very much for your time today. Daniel, thank you so much for supporting us, and we're excited about the partnership and taking it into the market and hopefully adding some fantastic value to the clients on the call. We've recorded the webinar just for everybody on the call, and we'll make it available after the session. You will get a follow-up email just to point you through to that link. And you know, for those that couldn't join, please forward the link onto them, so you know that they could actually go ahead and listen to it. But happy that you reach out directly to me for any further information, and happy to have another session directly with you and Daniel and the rest of the Flowgear team. Thank you again for your time, and from myself and Daniel, have a great day.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks everyone. Cheers.